Hey, how's it going? This is Ray back with another episode of Flight Box here on YouTube. A spoiler-free conversation on Moon Knight Episode 2, Summon the Suit. I watched it earlier today. It dropped on Disney Plus, and I have some thoughts. It's kind of tricky trying to talk about this stuff spoiler-free, but I'm going to do the best I can and try to keep anybody that hasn't seen it yet in the dark as much as possible so as not to spoil anything for you. Just a heads up on that. So, without further ado, high-level thoughts. I liked this week's episode, but I don't think I liked it as well as I did that pilot episode. There were some things that the second episode did that kind of strayed away from the general tone and the idea that the pilot episode kind of introduced, and for lack of a better way to put it, made it more MCU-centric in that regard. And, to be clear, this is an MCU show, so at some point, some of the same ideas and some of the same tones and some of the same, decisions that are made with respect to humor and with respect to characterizations in this universe are going to show up in this show because it's a part of the whole, the giant franchise as a whole, right? Like, the whole thing was cinematic television in the first place, and now they're getting into actual television, and this is kind of another addition into that. And it's not that I dislike a lot of those things that they did, it's just that I liked how they kind of went in a different direction for the majority of the pilot, and in this one, some of that direction was still there, but there was also some things that harken back to the tried and true formula that the MCU has always kind of stuck with here and there. But overall, I did enjoy the second episode. So what did I like about episode 2, Summon the Suit? Well, I still really like how this show is shot and like how the director is composing the camera, and there's still some very cool artistic license that he's taking with the lighting and the shading and different perspectives, like there's some long hallway shots and some darker corners, and also there was one shot that, of the main character, Oscar Isaac's main character, walking into a building, walking into the museum that his character works at, and it was like a reverse shot, and it panned and was actually upside down. It was a really cool artistic choice that I actually really liked from a perspective standpoint. So there's still little things like that, artistically speaking, that are being done in this show that I really enjoy. And I also still really enjoy the music. Hesham Nazi has just done a fantastic job with the score for this film, and I really hope I pronounced his name right. But, as far as the vocalizations and the orchestrations, there was a lot more use of the choir in this episode, and it really lends more gravitas to what is happening in some of the more action-packed scenes, some of the more adventuristic scenes, because this still is very much like an action-adventure show, kind of at its core. And there's still definitely a psychological component to what is going on with the main character that Oscar Isaac is playing, but by the same token, it's not so incredibly grounded that it's just a psychological study of what is going on with him and what is going on with the characters that are related to him. It is absolutely, at its core, more of an action-adventure story and almost kind of a globe-trotting story, especially considering where this episode ends and where it's going to take us going forward. I still have no complaints about any of the acting. Oscar Isaac is still really good, especially in terms of the multiple, work that he's had to do in this show. I still have no issues with his British accent. I don't know if anybody has complained about it or not. I'm not complaining. I think he's fine. No issues with him as far as that is concerned. I also have no issues with Ethan Hawke. In fact, to be honest with you, I like what they're doing with his villain character, with his antagonist character. And that's kind of a clue here, not, diving into spoilers. I would consider his character more of an antagonist at this point, not an out-and-out villain. And it has to do with his motivations. It has to do with the mindset that he has. And one of the things that really makes a villain or an antagonist more of a formidable threat in these types of projects is the idea that they're not just a mustache-twirling villain, but that they're actually someone that believes that what they're doing is right. And that is absolutely the case with Ethan Hawke's character. He is somebody that 100% believes that what he is doing and his goals and aims in this show are completely correct and morally sound. And that's really dangerous. In fact, I'll go ahead and go out on a limb here. For people that have watched Infinity War, and if you're a Marvel fan, of course, I'm sure you've seen Infinity War and you're well aware of Thanos and the morality of his entire plan to wipe out half of existence in the universe. I think at this point, 2 episodes into Moon Knight, the motivation for Ethan Hawke's character Harrow, I think it's a stronger moral motivation than Thanos in Infinity War Endgame by like a long shot. Like there's just more substance there, and it's more dangerous and more believable here because of what he thinks is the right thing to do compared to what is actually the right thing to do, or at least what the other side of it regarding the Moon Knight character and everything there is going through. What I didn't necessarily care for in this episode. The MCU stuff that I'm talking about that kind of reared its head in this episode has to do with the humor. I realize that's a sore spot for a number of people when it comes to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. On either side, if you are an MCU fan that defends the type of humor that they do, or if you're somebody on the other side that doesn't necessarily care for the way that they use one-liners and silly little scenes to try and invoke some humor in an otherwise serious and tension-filled moment. Yeah, there was a point in this episode where it went a little too far, in my subjective opinion. It's all subjective. I don't, by and large, dislike the MCU's humor. It's just that, again, where I was at with the pilot episode of this show, I just wasn't feeling where they put that and how they did it in this particular episode. It is what it is. I'm not surprised that it was there because, again, this is the MCU's formula and they're not going to stray too far away from what they normally do. But I wasn't really feeling it, to be honest with you. I also wasn't really feeling the performance from Layla, the character of Layla in this episode, because you're introduced to her like auditorially in the first episode, and then you actually see her in this episode and you see, what kind of relationship she truthfully has to the main character, and it's like, well, I don't know, just something about the performance didn't ring all that great for me. It's only 1 episode and I don't want to completely judge it like all the way through, so I'll see how that develops, but at this point, I don't know, I for some reason just wasn't really feeling that part of it, to be honest with you. So does this mean I'm going to stop watching the show? No, of course not. I mean, that's not enough for me to stop watching the show completely. It's only 2 episodes in, and I don't want to make any, grand sweeping assumptions on what the rest of the show is going to be. And to be very honest with you, to this point, if I've watched all 27 Marvel Cinematic Universe movies in theater, and if I've watched all of their shows, all the way up to this point, then there's no reason that I'm gonna just all of a sudden quit watching this. The show has not done nearly enough for me to be like, oh, well, no, I don't need to go any further with it. I'm still very much intrigued with where they're going with the story and with what they're doing with the different characterizations and what angle exactly they're going to take with respect to this. There was a little bit where I could see some of what people are talking about, the criticism of MCU Disney Plus shows, in that they feel like long movies that are cut up into multiple episodes, right? 6-episode blocks, essentially. And there is a bit of that feeling. Like, this, similar to the other Disney Plus shows for the MCU, does feel like they shot like a 4.5-hour long film, and it doesn't have the same breaks that like a normal show formatted for television, whether it's streaming or otherwise, would seem to have. But in that respect, I don't consider that a bad thing. It's just how the MCU decides to do it. And it's all subjective anyway, because I'm sure somebody could watch all of the MCU shows and think, well, no, there's a cliffhanger and they end here and they do this. It feels just like regular television. Yeah, for sure. So not nearly as much to break down with the 2nd episode of this show, but like I said, I am still watching it, and I will continue to offer spoiler-free thoughts on it here on YouTube, and of course, spoiler-filled thoughts in podcast form on the FliteCast Patreon. Which, if you are interested, you can just go to patreon.com/theflightcast and listen to a more in-depth conversation on the actual spoilers going on with this show. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time.